evidence that young people who had this idea that they could lead a self-determined life of meaning and purpose made different decisions, but it didn't come from nowhere. And usually these four pillars: family, religion, education, and entrepreneurship.
Hi again, everybody. Welcome to another episode of The Narrative. Mike Andrews and David Mahan. We have somehow managed to wrestle him from the grip of the State House across the street. You have been spending what? Most of your time this week over there?
I've got a cot that I have down there in the crypt. They let me use the bathroom and everything. It's amazing.
Yeah, you have been a busy, busy man. And just anecdotally, we were talking before we came on here, there's a lot of legislation that CCV's either promoting or just keeping tabs on that's moving across the street right now. I know you're 3-4 years into your career here at CCV full time. So
yeah, full time 4 years. Yeah.
Have you seen anything like this? This seems uniquely busy, at least from my perspective.
Yeah, definitely. There's been a shift. We've got about 24 that we're watching.
Wow.
And active in. And then, today, every day almost, there's somebody calling, one of the members calling and saying, hey, can you help me with this bill we're dropping this week? Or it's intense, but it's good time. Somebody's got to do it, right?
They picked a good man for it in calling you, David. So tell us a little bit about what you've had your eye on this week. I know you've testified a couple of times. So what have been some of the main pieces of legislation that you've had a focus on this week?
I think the three things we're working on this week primarily, and it does change from week to week. Yesterday I testified on the success sequence, basically, that says that if a kid can graduate high school, work a full-time job in their 20s, and then, if they have children, to be married first, 97% of those kids, and this is a 30-year longitudinal study, man. It's one of the most amazing longitudinal studies on poverty avoidance ever done, and it's just, the numbers are staggering. Even for kids that are disadvantaged, meaning maybe their parents were not wealthy, maybe their parents were single parents, right? Maybe the father wasn't involved. Still, 95%. Of those kids, make it out of poverty. What about black and brown kids, right? That's one of the questions that the members will always ask. Well, is this just the majority race, or what about black and brown kids? Well, the thing is, there's disparities for when they don't go through all three steps, right? But when they do go through all three steps, 95% of those kids avoid poverty, and over 80% actually make it into the middle and higher tax bracket. So it's good news for everybody, and we still had some knuckleheads in the committee fighting that. Yeah. And that was the question that kept coming up: is like, why would anybody not support this? I mean, it costs nothing, right, to do this, to give this information to kids and empower young people with this. So that they can, have some agency in life.
You're not trying to get the funding for a 30-year study. The work's been done. The data is in.
You got to watch the hearing to believe this stuff anyway, man. It's crazy.
Yeah, and we're going to talk today with Ian Rowe. Well, we actually talked with him yesterday before he testified when he was in town, but we're going to air that interview today as part of the podcast. And that's such a great perspective.
That is my guy. You get into the weeds with a lot of these academics and folks that are all into the theory, and they can spout off all the data, but it's rare to get somebody like that who's also a practitioner. This guy has actually run schools, but not just schools. He's run schools in the Bronx, where so many of those kids do not graduate, or when they do, they're not proficient. I think he said only 7% are. And then 80-some, almost 90% of kids were born out of wedlock. And so how do you manage with all of that and be successful as he has been in his schools? It's been amazing.
And it's interesting to me as an outsider to all this. You bring in somebody with those credentials and you still get all the whataboutism from from the members as they're doing
hilarious.
It's like,
he ate them all up, though. It was funny. You can't see all the members' faces, but they're texting me all throughout the hearing. It's absolutely hilarious. And then the Library Association comes and talks about there's holes in the ceiling, and the roof is leaking, and we've got rats. But y'all got yoga though. Y'all got chair yoga. And one of the members said, "Why don't you take the chair yoga money and fix the roof?" You got to be in these hearings, man, to believe it.
Yeah, that sounds like you couldn't even script it. It's like a comedy troupe or something at times.
And then Dave gets up at 6:15 to testify. Lord have mercy.
Well, God bless you for doing it. More testimony today, though, because you went back to back, and you were up this morning talking about what the AI porn.
It's so gross, man. I had to testify on this one last year for Senator Johnson and Senator Blessing. For some reason, it did not pass last year. I think they were all hung up. What it is we've got what many of you have heard as deep fakes, where we actually have apps out there now that kids, like $8 apps, some of these apps are free, that kids can actually use, put a picture of their friend in the app, and then generate videos and images that are very disgusting, obscene in nature of their friends, and then what they call sextort them, and say, hey, if you don't give me money, we're gonna put this out there so everybody can see it. And then you've got that on just an international scale. And so they did not pass that this year. Thankfully, Yost is on this bill. About 50, we got all 50 attorneys generals are behind this bill, saying we've got to do something. But one of the pieces of the bills that makes it problematic, difficult, we'll put it that way, is that they're requiring that on anything that AI generates, you have to have a watermark. And sometimes that's a visible watermark, as we would see on paper, or sometimes that's just something that identifies that this was generated through AI in the code. So if there's ever any issue on a systemic level with this AI-generated pornography, that it can be tracked, even if it's from somebody outside of the country. And so, what does that look like? Is that gonna hinder ChatGPT? Is that gonna? And the point that we're trying to make is it may inconvenience some of us as adults, but when you're looking at what's happening with young people across the planet, where it used to be you just worried about kids being physically abused. No, now we've got kids being digitally abused, and it's extremely dangerous. And it's got the attention, like I said, of every attorney general across the country and our territories, and we've got to get something done this General Assembly for sure.
Yeah, there's the dark side of AI. As much as we've started to benefit, all of us, from content creation and that type of stuff, when you get into this level of obscenity, and what it can do to a young kid's life if they're the victim of it.
I mean, I know it probably affects you. I mean, all of your birthday cards, your anniversary cards, you write your wifey is all AI generated.
It's all fake.
That would affect the home.
Nobody has anything nice to say about poor old Mike, so they got to run it through ChatGPT. Say something nice to the old man so that he can feel loved on his birthday.
Yeah, the other thing, I think the last thing that we'll talk about is, we've got marijuana. Obviously, that's huge, and we've educated our groups on that. But the App Store, age verification on the app at the App Store level, many of you have heard in Congress them kind of bringing in Facebook, now Meta, Google, Comcast, AT&T, and there's been so much back and forth that finally Meta came out and said, hey, we got to do something about this. And so they've been asking members to support their wish list bill with all kinds of loopholes, and they put the weight on the other Google, and then Google has their wish list bill and they put the weight on Meta. It just goes back and forth. And so we threw our hat in there just to protect families. And even in the press conference, we said we understand that there's a lot of influential titans behind this, and our role here is to make sure the best interest of families and children come first in all of this. And thankfully, we have strong relationships with the sponsor in the Senate, strong relationship with the sponsor in the House, and we've got some really great model legislation out of Utah that looks like we're going to be able to get in the mix. So they're not going to get their wish list this time.
Oh, nice. So what exactly is the model legislation from Utah? Like at least maybe 2 or 3 high points of it.
Well, what they're doing is the wish list bills kind of put everything into the context of content. Right. And that's where you kind of get into First Amendment issues, right? If it's a content related thing and you're judging, one group is judging the content for another, then it's not really been winning across the country. If you put it on, a 16-year-old cannot enter into a contract, there is no precedent for that. And that's what they're asking for in these bills, because they know that they will all fail in court, right? Because you can't honor a contract with a 16-year-old. The contract has to be done on the parental level. And so that's the biggest piece, but there's a ton of loopholes in these bills. And so thankfully we're in partnership with some national partners that we trust, EPPC, Heritage, and COSI, and so we've got a lot of help on it, and we've got some good members that are carrying these bills, and it's looking good for us right now. But be praying.
Absolutely. Pray for David. Pray for his endurance and stamina so that he can keep up the fight, because it's been a long week, and we've got galas this weekend too, and we'll be talking about those next.
You bring up the game.
We done it. We broke David. We finally broke David on the narrative. Well, we are going to take a quick break here, and we will get back and have our interview with Ian Rowe. It's great stuff. Just in general, to learn more about the success sequence and why it works, and really the hope that it provides students that get to hear about it as part of their school curriculum. You're not going to want to miss it, so stick around. It's coming up next on The Narrative. Hey, Narrative listeners. Christians in the marketplace today face more unique and challenging threats than ever before. Businesses are following woke capitalism, chambers of commerce are beholden to social justice, and secular activists are chipping away Christians' First Amendment rights. As Ohio's only Christian Chamber of Commerce, the Christian Business Partnership stands in the gap to advocate for, to educate, and to celebrate Christian business owners. Joining the partnership also allows businesses to provide their employees with healthcare insurance, workers' compensation, and exclusive banking and educational discounts. To find out more and to join, go to cbpohio.org. That's cbpohio.org. And we're back on The Narrative. Mike Andrews, David Mahan, joined now by Ian Rowe, who's a senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, where he focuses on education and upward mobility, family formation, and adoption. He's also co-founder of the Vertex Partnership Academies. He holds degrees from Harvard Business School and Cornell University. And as a New York native, Ian is a husband and father as well. Just many, many important credentials that we need to cover. And repeat guest on The Narrative. I believe you were one of our originals back before they added some real talent to the show and brought me on board. Exactly. I know David can testify to that.
Yeah, well, if we get you going here today, we won't have to listen to Mike.
All right. I got it
already.
I walked right into that one. Well, Ian, just tell us a little bit. What brings you to Columbus today?
Yeah, well, first of all, guys, thanks for having me. And thank you. Yes, husband and father are two of my most important titles. I was telling David earlier, we hear a lot about fatherhood. I'm hoping that we can start a movement behind something called husbandhood. That, and as the precursor to fatherhood. But the reason I'm here today is that there's a Senate bill, 156, that has been authored to mandate that a new idea be incorporated into curriculum for 6th through 12th graders in the state of Ohio. And that idea is something called a success sequence. And for many people who are not familiar with that term, the success sequence is just a nice title to a series of decisions that when young people make that series of decisions, it dramatically reduces their likelihood of living a life of poverty. And the steps associated with the success sequence are that if you complete at least a high school degree, so not even necessarily college, but complete a high school degree, then get a full-time job of any kind, so you learn the dignity and discipline of work. And then if you have children, if you get married first, right, so you follow that series of decisions, education, work, marriage, then children. Mm-hmm. The data shows that 97% of young people who follow that series of decisions avoid poverty as adults, and the vast majority enter the middle class or beyond. That's really important information for young people to learn. We teach it in our schools in the Bronx, and it's been very powerful because it's a mechanism for young people who may not otherwise be exposed to this kind of decision making, so that they learn what are the likely pathways of decisions that can lead me into a life of prosperity.
So did you say the Bronx? So
Boogie Down Bronx, yes.
So you must be just working with the affluent part of the Bronx,
yeah.
like that one block where
yes,
where all the rich
Riverdale,
kids, all the rich kids go.
Yes.
Because what we hear even in committee is that this only applies to a certain set of young people, like, you know, those that were born with a silver spoon in their mouth, and 97% avoid poverty. Come on, you know. And I actually heard, Ian, just 2 weeks ago that marriage is unrealistic for this particular representative's district up in Cleveland. So tell us about your work actually in the Bronx and how this is implemented with your young people, and what are the parents saying?
Yeah. So, Mike, as you mentioned, I am a senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, and it's an incredible platform to do research and policy on education, on family formation, on upward mobility. But in addition, I am a practitioner. I run schools for the last 15 years in the Bronx, in low-income communities, with primarily Black and Hispanic students. And so what I try to do is marry theory and practice, right? What are the ideas that really work on the ground with the very people that many of us claim that we want to improve their lives, but really don't know that much about. And so I've been running schools now, as I mentioned, for 15 years. Like, for example, in the district, we opened up an international baccalaureate high school in a district in the Bronx in which only 7% of students graduate from high school ready for college, meaning that of the 2,000 or so students in this district that start ninth grade, 4 years later, they have either dropped out or they did earn their high school diploma but still cannot do math nor reading without remediation.
I don't want to gloss over that. He didn't say 70, family. He said 7%. Yes. This is not Haiti. This is not some third world country.
Exactly.
This is New York City. We've got young people in a community in America, one of the most beautiful, amazing cities in the world, right? And only 7% graduate.
Yeah, from high school. The thing I don't know which is worse. Because some of them do graduate, they just still can't do math nor reading.
Proficiently.
Right? So, which is worse? You drop out, or you do the thing that you're supposed to do, but you still cannot compete on equal footing. And it is in the Bronx, but it's also in Brooklyn. It's also in Yonkers. It's also in Chicago. It's also in Detroit. Yeah. It's also in Cleveland. Yeah. So these readiness rates, I like to call them, are unfortunately low across the country, which is one of the reasons, elements like school choice, vouchers, charter schools are so important, because it's the first rung for the success sequence, right? If the first rung is to at least finish a high school degree, then at least let's make sure that kids actually have access to a high-quality school, K to 12. Also in my district, the non-marital birth rate is about 85%.
Wow.
So what that means is nearly 9 in 10 babies that are born in this particular district are born outside of marriage. Now, it's always important to say that simply because a child is born into a single-parent situation, that's not a guarantee of failure or their life is doomed. In the same way that a child born into a married two-parent household, their life is guaranteed to be successful. So those things are true. That said, the data is overwhelming that the likely life prospects of a child born into a married two-parent, healthy married two-parent household they're far higher than a child born into a single-parent household on a whole bunch of dimensions: education, crime, poverty. And so that is what we want to help young people understand. Okay, well, what are the series of decisions that would help me get into that situation as I think about future family formation? Not necessarily about the family that I'm in now, but the formation of my own family, which is why we think teaching the success sequence is so important. And then when you ask, what do parents think? Because I often get this question, wait a minute, you're from a district where nearly 9 in 10 babies are born outside of marriage, and you're talking about teaching the success sequence, which is encouraging marriage. Won't that be embarrassing the parents? Won't that be shaming them? And it's a very profound question. And when we ask our parents, we say, look, you've chosen our school. We're a charter school, for the strong academics and math and science. You're going to get that. But we also are going to teach your kids about this thing called the success sequence, because we think that that's important data for your child to know. And the overwhelming feedback we get from our parents, the vast majority of whom did not follow these series of steps, they say to us, thank God someone is teaching this content to my child, because I wish someone had taught it to me when I was growing up.
And it seems like it's such a common sense, simple idea, I guess, to bridge something you said, David, with the fact that we get pushback on this, which doesn't make any sense. But what is it about these ideas that make them so effective, Ian, or that you've seen as a practitioner actually implementing them and seeing them make a difference?
Well, I think in education, there's a comfort level when we talk about things like college and career, right? No one bats an eye when you talk about education and work. It's this idea that we're taking this one step further when we talk about marriage and children. And I think there are those who get concerned, wait a minute, are you moralizing? Are you trying to impose middle-class values? Are you trying to step out of the realm of what schools are supposed to do? And for us, we want our kids to be in a position, we have something called the life deciding decade. That's the period from age 14 to 24, because that period of time, young people are making hugely important decisions about their education, relationships, work, family formation. The quality of the decisions during that period of time, between age 14 and 24, the quality of the decisions you make during that period of time, or the lack of quality, has huge influence over the quality of the rest of your life. So we think it's really important to equip our students with the best possible information. This is not moralizing, because if you make the decisions, education, work, marriage, and children, 97% of the time you will avoid poverty as adults. If you make decisions in a different order, then actually your likelihood of poverty is extremely high. Right? So the whole idea is that we want to empower young people with quality information. So there are those who may get concerned because they think there's some other agenda, but fundamentally, this is information that can empower young people, and in particular young people living in poor communities that may not be seeing these models of other people who've made these kinds of decisions. Not enough anyway. And so that's my response to those folks.
I would say this to our audience, and I don't know if I've ever told you this, Ian, but I get pushback every opportunity I can. I try to get you in front of a mic or a camera. I think this may be your second or third time in front of our CCV audience. The reason why I do that is because when you speak, and this is to an advantage and a disadvantage. Either they love Ian Rowe and the work that he does with AEI, or they generally are like, I don't know how I feel about Ian Rowe. And I'm like, why? And it's because they're not hearing their political party. They're not hearing any one particular political persuasion, and that makes them nervous. But you know the data.
Right.
And you love the people.
Yes.
That's what I love about you, is that you care about these kids. Back to that, though. I'm stuck on this 7%. Because I've been in schools all across the country, and in our failing, schools, all you gotta do is show up.
I know,
right? There is no academic rigor. There is no homework. There are no books. Just show up and don't cuss everybody out and fight somebody, and you can graduate, right? And potentially get a college, get a college degree. I mean, you probably won't, graduate after 4 years, but you're telling me. So is it that in the Bronx, that 7% are not graduating because the academic rigor is so high? Are we dealing with underperforming schools and kids are still not graduating? So
again, it's really important to say it's not graduation, because the rate is 7% graduate from high school not ready for college, meaning that you either have dropped out,
right,
or you have graduated. You did earn your diploma, but you can't read.
That's right.
Nor do math. In Illinois, just announced that there are 80 schools from which 0 kids scored proficiency on the state math exam. 80 across the state. And again, go to Michigan, go to Ohio. This is unfortunately, and in that in Illinois, where those 80 schools, 0 kids were proficient in math, 70% of the students were graduated.
Wow.
70% of the students were graduated. So it's not only that these schools are underperforming, they're also allowing these kids to go on knowing that they have impaired their ability to lead a life, a self-determined life, because they are going to be under the gun. And that is a tragedy. That's why I run Schools in the Hood. I refuse to let that situation exist.
See, I wonder how many parents realize that, because when I'm speaking in the political realm, it's because we have underperforming schools because there's a lack of funding. I would doubt that that's the case.
I mean, in New York, people fall off their chair, but and this is for public charter school, our foundational per pupil is about $19,000. If you add on all the other things that we get, we're in the 30s. And charter schools only get about 75% of what a traditional school gets, right? So you're talking well into the high $30,000 per kid in the public school system. You can go to a lot of private schools for that. So there's not enough accountability, and ultimately there needs to be more choice. Now in Ohio, you do have the benefit of having your voucher program that you can empower parents to walk with their feet to choose better options. But this is where the action is. This is where the action is, and the success sequence is a way to help young people kind of order their lives around the things that matter. It gives them a sense of what are the big decisions I got to make, as a young person, that life-deciding decade. I got to get a good education, do well. I got to get meaningful work. And then if I have children, if I get married first, there are a whole bunch of other things, have a faith commitment, avoid the criminal justice system. There's a whole bunch of other things. Mm-hmm. But what this data shows is that, and sometimes it's almost too simplistic for people. They don't like the fact. They actually don't like that it's so simple. But that's what the data says.
And that it doesn't cost millions of dollars. Like, there is no appropriation for this bill for the success sequence, right?
Well, what's interesting is, a school can incorporate this into their curriculum in a health class, in advisory, even in a class on probabilities, right? Because the 97% is likelihood of avoidance of poverty. It's not 100%, right? So, because life is not a guarantee, but we want to put kids in a position where they understand what are the likely rewards or consequences associated with different series of life decisions. And at the end of the day, a young person is going to make decisions for themselves. So it's not about the money in this case. It's about getting quality information to young people on a timely basis.
This is some of the most encouraging information I've heard in a very long time, especially as it relates to disadvantaged youth, right? When you dig into the data, because that's one of the first questions that come up, well, what about disadvantaged youth? What about a kid who does not come from a wealthy family? What about a child that, maybe they didn't come from a two-parent home? And so what the data says that I've seen, and you could confirm this or deny this, but what it says is if you have a young person who does not go through, who's black or brown, and does not, achieve or follow all 3 steps, right? That individual will probably see disproportionate harms.
That's correct.
I think up in 70 percentile will be poverty, will be impoverished, versus maybe someone who was white, maybe 40% of those will experience poverty. But for the black and brown students that do follow all 3 steps, that whole race gap disparity is broken.
All that goes away.
95%, who go through all, even if they're black or brown, will avoid poverty, and over 80%, I think it's 80% for blacks, 86% for Hispanics, will avoid poverty, but also end up in the middle and upper classes. That's beautiful.
We've all seen this. So I've been doing this work now long enough where I've worked in many different environments with many different types of young people: rich, poor, white, black, Asian, Hispanic, kids growing up in poverty, kids growing up in experiencing domestic violence, foster care.
Mm-hmm.
And I've seen a lot of kids, unfortunately, as they enter this, what I call the life-deciding decade, they start making decisions where they recreate the same dysfunction that they experienced, perpetuating that cycle of degradation. But I've also seen young people in those same exact conditions make different sets of decisions, where they have a future orientation that leads them to make different sets of decisions. And the question is, what makes the difference? And in my observation, my experience, those young people have this sense of personal agency, that they can lead this idea of a self-determined life. But it doesn't come from nowhere. Others have educated them on what are the big decisions. And one of the first things is they recognize it's not about the family that I'm from, it's about the family that I'm on the pathway to form. Mm. That's why the success sequence is so powerful, because you cannot control what a kid is experiencing now, but you can say your future can be different. You can gain control. Here are steps that other people just like you, kids that were in the same exact conditions, they had this orientation around their lives, and the data says education, work, marriage, then children leads to very different outcomes than what you're living now. And for us, that's kind of one of the fundamental purposes of schooling.
Yep.
How do we have young people understand that life is not easy, life is not a guarantee, but there are things in your control?
Yeah, that leads me to the question, Ian. Have you seen the light bulb go on in kids as you tell them this? Just can you give any sliver of an example of what it looks like when a kid really gets this and understands that they do have that self-agency?
Well, I have a funny story. When we were conceiving our high school Vertex Partnership Academies in the Bronx, I was traveling and visiting other high schools across the country. And this was when we had first started teaching the success sequence in New York. And I was getting lots of pushback. So here I was in New Orleans, visiting this high school, visiting a class of 9th graders. And I said to the teacher, do you mind if I ask to get advice from your students? Because I'm kind of dealing with an issue in New York. And the teacher said, okay. So imagine me in front of a classroom full of 9th graders, so 14 years old. And it was predominantly poor, but racially diverse, so Black, Hispanic, and Asian. And here's exactly what I said to these students. I said, if you knew that there were a series of decisions in your control, that when young people just like you followed that series of decisions, 97% avoided poverty, would you want to know what those series of decisions were? And the students looked at me and they said, well, yeah, why? Sure, of course. Why wouldn't you let us know? And I said, well, there's some grown-ups that think that there's some grown-ups that think that I shouldn't tell you. You might get embarrassed, you might get shamed. So you know what? I'm not going to tell you. And the students looked at me like, what is going? Wait. You tell us. You let us decide. After we've got the information, we'll decide if this is something important or not. And it was just this powerful moment, because there it is, right there. Because there are all these gatekeepers, mm-hmm. right? The gatekeepers who claim that they know what's better for these population. No, you can't tell. You can't tell that you're going to shame them. Their parents didn't follow the success sequence, so no. We don't want to embarrass them. So better that they don't know it all. And so in that conversation, I proceeded to have a discussion about the success sequence. And what's really important is that we teach it, and even this conversation is, we had it in what I call a descriptive fashion, not prescriptive. Descriptive meaning these series of decisions leads to 97% likelihood of avoidance of poverty. These sets of decisions leads to much higher likelihood of poverty. But ultimately, you decide. And at the end of the conversation, I felt that these students felt what I consider respected as future decision makers in their own life. And so that was a huge light bulb moment for me, and I think these students.
Yeah, there's an element there of the adults in the room or trying to gatekeep, almost saying, well, they're beyond hope. Their situation like it seems like they're trying to say, don't give them hope that they could actually change their circumstances.
Underlying so many of these issues is a lack of belief in the people themselves. We can't tell them this. We can't. Wait, why? And by the way, many of the people who are saying these things that you can't teach this have practiced the success sequence in their own lives.
That's right.
Right?
That's right.
They have gotten their education, gotten a full-time job, and if they had children, they got married first. But somehow there is this disconnect. I'm imposing middle-class values. Yeah, you are. We're imposing middle-class values. We're helping young people make good decisions. That's the idea.
Right. We're supposed to. We're supposed to raise up the next generation.
Yes. Chris Rock has this great skit. That's what you're supposed to do.
It's almost racist. Some of them will even look at this information as it's almost racist to go to Cleveland.
Well, So what I have found for people who are adamantly opposed to teaching this kind of content is that even though deep down they probably know it's true and they follow it in their own life, they are so wedded to the narrative of structural bias being the real issue. You can't introduce another idea which is about empowerment and personal agency and individual responsibility, because somehow if you introduce those ideas, that means you're taking attention away from the real issue, which is the structural racism. And so we just have to fight that. There are barriers. I mean, in that same district where we are, where only 7% of kids graduate from high school ready for college, in New York City, there's a cap on charter schools. Mm-hmm. So if you had an idea to launch a school to improve the outcome, you couldn't do it. So that is a real example of a structural barrier.
Can a kid in that failing district just choose to go to another district, to go to a public school in another district?
It's extremely difficult. Mm-hmm. And if you're a school leader, like when we opened our school, we were actually sued by the teachers union that tried to shut us down before we opened. Thankfully, we were able to win the case. But it gives you a sense of how hard it is. So there are structural barriers. That is an example. So we need to fight that. We need to fight for the opportunity for more young people to have choice, vouchers, whatever gives them educational freedom, while also focusing on the power of individual decision-making.
Agency.
Agency.
Tell us about your book before we close this down. You've got an amazing book out there. You've got a free concept that you talk about that I just think is amazing.
Well, as I said before, I mean, all of us, we've had the benefit of working with kids over the years, and we've seen too many instances where kids recreate the dysfunction that they experienced, and yet others had different sets of experiences where they were able to break the trajectory, that cycle of deprivation. And my experience is that agency was the difference, that young people who had this idea that they could lead a self-determined life of meaning and purpose made different decisions, but it didn't come from nowhere. And usually these four pillars, family, religion, education, and entrepreneurship, those pillars were the things that I've observed. So young people who were able to recognize it's not about the family that I'm from, it's about the family that I'm on the pathway to form, usually made decisions like those associated with the success sequence. Young people that had a personal faith commitment, usually informed by an organized religion, and they were part of a community of people that loved them and they lived by a moral code. That's the R in free.
That's not just the Bible, family. That's scientific data.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. The third element, the E in free, education, is young people who benefited from some kind of educational freedom, school choice, vouchers. And so if those first three elements of family, religion, education were in place, you're on the pathway to form a strong family. You have a personal faith commitment through religion. You have benefited from educational freedom. That usually leads to the last E, which is what I call an entrepreneurial mindset. You have an overcomer's mindset. You have the ability to deal when arduous challenges inevitably come your way. So family, religion, education, and entrepreneurship is my framework for how I'm trying to encourage more young people to achieve this level of personal agency.
Well, if people want to follow you, follow your work, where can they check out everything you've got going on, Ian?
Yeah, so you can track me down. All my work is at the American Enterprise Institute, so that's aei.org, or our schools, Vertex Partnership Academies, that's vertexacademies.org. I'm on X, I'm on LinkedIn, but please reach out. We have to fight the perception that these people are homeless, it's too far gone. There are strategies that young people are using every day to create very different lives for themselves.
That's right.
And we shouldn't be bashful about expressing what those strategies are, right? I mean, in the Black community, the poverty rate has been in the single digits for as long as they've been collecting these records for married Black couples. That's interesting, right? That's interesting. Shouldn't our community know that, right? And so we are being irresponsible when we don't teach things like the success sequence in schools, because we're depriving the very young people that need to hear this information most from information that can really transform their lives.
Well, Ian, thanks for your work. Thanks for your voice. It's been great chatting with you today, and wish you the best in your testimony this afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of The Narrative, presented by CCV and produced by Wessler Media. If you found today's episode insightful, leave us a review or rating and subscribe anywhere you get your podcasts. We're your hosts, Mike Andrews, Aaron Baer, and David Mahan, and we'll see you next time on The Narrative.